And if we act quickly, we may still be able to stop the clock.
July 19th, 2014. A quiet, leafy street in Tallahassee, Florida. A father of two, brilliant law professor Dan Markel, pulls into his driveway. Within minutes, he's gunned down. At first, it looks like a random act of violence. But behind it was a conspiracy woven inside a wealthy family, desperate to keep control. This is a story of betrayal, obsession, and a grandmother who prosecutors say would do anything to get her way. Tonight, we'll uncover how a custody battle spiraled into a murder-for-hire plot that shocked the nation. It was a quiet summer morning in Tallahassee, Florida. The kind of morning where the air hangs heavy, where neighbors water their lawns, and children ride bikes through winding suburban streets. But on July 18th, 2014, one of those streets would never be the same. Dan Markel, a prominent law professor at Florida State University, pulled into his driveway after dropping his children off at preschool. He had no idea he was being followed. No idea his every move had been watched. No idea that in just a few minutes, his life would end in a way so brutal, so shocking, that it would unravel an entire family and expose a conspiracy no one thought possible. Dan had devoted his career to studying justice, but justice was about to turn its back on him. The neighbors later said they heard what sounded like a car backfiring, two sharp cracks in the air. But these weren't mechanical misfires. They were bullets.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
It's right next door to my house, which is 2122 Trescott Drive.
Can you repeat that for verification?
2122 Trescott Drive, the T.
Okay, the phone number you're calling from?
I'm calling from 850-212-4623.
Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
We heard a loud bang and a car pulled away from next door. I came over and looked in, the garage door was up, and I thought the gentleman was backing out. And I went back to my house, but he never backed out. And I came back over, and his driver's side window is shattered, and he's battered and can't answer. He's inside. I don't know if somebody tried to shoot him or if he shot himself or what. I don't know.
And was that this location, correct?
Right next door. I gave you mine. I don't know his address. It's next door.
Okay.
You can send an ambulance in a hurry. EMT. He's still alive. He's moving.
Okay. What's going on with him?
I don't know. The driver's side window is all bashed in. He's inside. The car is running, and he's got blood all over his head. He's not responding to me. That number, by the way, is 2116-2116.
What's your name, sir?
My name is Jim Geiger, Geiger.
Dan was still in his car, his hands gripping the wheel when the first shot rang out. His head slumped forward. The second shot tore into him before he even had time to scream. The gunman, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, vanished just as quickly as he appeared. The sound of screeching tires filled the street, and within seconds, The professor lay dying in his own driveway. Police would later describe it as a cold-blooded execution. But who would want Dan Markel dead? To understand the magnitude of this crime, you have to know who Dan was. Dan Markel wasn't just any professor. He was a Harvard-educated scholar, a nationally respected voice in criminal law. Colleagues admired his sharp intellect. Students remembered his passion for teaching, and his family, above all, knew him as a devoted father of 2 young boys. But behind the polished reputation was a man in the middle of turmoil. Dan was recently divorced from his wife, Wendi Adelson. Their split had been bitter, marked by custody battles and courtroom drama. At the center of it all were their 2 children. Children both parents loved fiercely, but whose custody had become a weapon in a war of resentment. And as we'll soon learn, that war was about to spill over into bloodshed. When first responders arrived, Dan was still clinging to life. He was rushed to Tallahassee Memorial Hospital, where doctors fought desperately to save him. But within hours, he was gone. The crime scene painted a chilling picture. A Toyota Prius had been spotted fleeing the area. No shell casings were found. The shooter had been careful. This wasn't random. It was professional. Detectives immediately suspected this was more than a botched robbery or road rage incident. The precision, the timing, the calm getaway, it all pointed to one thing: a planned hit. Suspense rises, and as police dug deeper into Dan's life, they discovered something far darker than they could have imagined. Dan's ex-wife, Wendi, had moved to Tallahassee from South Florida when Dan accepted his position at FSU. But according to friends, she never wanted to be there. She longed to return to Miami, to be near her wealthy and close-knit family, the Adelsons. There was only one problem. Dan wouldn't allow it. He fought to keep his children in Tallahassee, refusing Wendy's repeated requests to relocate. To Dan, uprooting the children meant robbing him of his daily role as their father. To Wendi and her family, it meant constant frustration. Police quickly learned that Wendy's parents, Harvey and Donna Adelson, were especially vocal. Friends recalled Donna once saying that if she could just buy Wendi a hitman as a divorce present, she would. At the time, people laughed it off as dark humor, but now it didn't sound like a joke. Was this feud enough to spark murder? The case sent shockwaves through Tallahassee. A respected professor, executed in broad daylight. Neighbors terrified, colleagues stunned, and Dan's family left in agony, not only mourning his death, but now facing the terrifying thought: could the mother of his children or her family be behind it? At this stage, investigators had no proof, no arrests, just suspicion. But one thing was clear: Dan Markel's murder wasn't just a crime. It was a message, and as the weeks unfolded, that message would reveal itself in shocking ways. Because behind the smiling family portraits, the expensive homes, and the polished image, the Adelson family was hiding secrets that would soon be dragged into the light. In the days after Dan Markel's murder, Tallahassee detectives pored over every lead. His colleagues at Florida State were questioned, his neighbors interviewed, and Wendi Adelson herself was brought in for hours of probing. At first, the investigation looked like a maze with no exit. A brilliant man was dead, a respected community shaken. But then one detail stood out: a car. Witnesses had seen a Toyota Prius idling suspiciously near Dan's neighborhood on the morning of the murder. Another neighbor recalled the same car speeding away seconds after the shots were fired. In 2014, Hybrid cars weren't as common in Tallahassee as they are today. This wasn't just a vehicle, it was a lead. Detectives pulled every traffic camera within a 5-mile radius. Hours of grainy footage were reviewed, enhanced, slowed down, and there it was, a Toyota Prius tailing Dan's car that morning. The hunt for that Prius would blow this case wide open. Suspense paused, but who was inside? S soon learned Garcia and Rivera weren't just boyfriends or friends. They were hired guns. Minute 3 to 4, the wiretap breakthrough. It took nearly 2 years of painstaking investigation, but in 2016, police finally connected the dots. Phone records placed Garcia and Rivera in Tallahassee at the exact time of Dan's murder. But that wasn't enough. Investigators needed to know why. So they turned to an old trick, wiretaps. Over months, hidden microphones and tapped phone lines captured conversations between Magbanua, Garcia, and Rivera. Buried within hours of chatter were chilling details. Talk of going up north, talk of the money, talk of the job. Slowly, the web began to untangle. In 2016, the break finally came. Rivera, already serving time in federal prison, was offered a deal. In exchange for testimony, his sentence would be reduced. On the stand, Rivera told the jury the unthinkable. He and Garcia had driven from Miami to Tallahassee in that Prius. They had waited for hours, circling, watching Dan's house. And when Dan pulled into his driveway, Garcia stepped out and pulled the trigger. It wasn't random. It wasn't spur of the moment. It was a murder for hire. Minute 5 to 6, the $100,000 job. According to Rivera, the hit was ordered for $100,000. Half paid before the job, half after. But here's the twist. Rivera swore that the money didn't come from Magbanua herself. She was just the middle link. The cash, she said, came from the Adelson family, specifically through Charlie Adelson, Wendy's brother. It was Charlie, Rivera claimed, who had ordered the hit. Charlie, who had the money. Charlie, who wanted Dan gone so his sister could move back to Miami, and so the Adelsons could keep their grip on the grandchildren. And if Charlie was pulling the strings, who else in the Adelson family knew? By now, detectives weren't just looking at hired hitmen. They were staring directly at the Adelson family. Phone calls between Charlie and Magbanua skyrocketed before and after the murder. Cash deposits appeared in Magbanua's account in suspicious chunks. Garcia and Rivera's testimonies lined up perfectly with travel records, phone pings, and financial trails. It was no longer just a theory. The Adelsons weren't victims of circumstance. They were at the heart of the storm. When word spread that respected dentists and philanthropists from South Florida might be tied to a cold-blooded murder, the community was stunned. How could a family of wealth and success fall so far? Was it really possible that parents, grandparents, and siblings would conspire to eliminate one man? All because of custody battle? For Dan's family, the truth was sickening. Not only had they lost him, but they now realized his children's maternal relatives might have orchestrated his death. In May 2016, Garcia and Rivera were charged with first-degree murder. Soon after, Magbanua was arrested too, charged with acting as a go-between. But for investigators, this wasn't enough. They wanted the people who ordered the hit. And all roads kept leading back to the Adelsons. While Charlie was now the primary suspect, Donna and Harvey Adelson remained under close scrutiny. Detectives wondered, Was Donna's infamous divorce present joke more than just sarcasm? And Wendi, who had testified she knew nothing about the murder, was she really in the dark? Or was she simply the shield that kept suspicion one step away from her family? The questions were endless, the evidence mounting, and the Adelsons' once pristine image was starting to crack. The walls were closing in. The hitmen had spoken, the middlewoman was exposed, and the financial trail pointed straight to the Adelsons. But the real shock was still to come, because soon, investigators would discover that the Adelson family's involvement ran deeper, darker, and far more organized than anyone could have imagined. By 2016, the pieces of the puzzle were snapping into place. The hitmen were behind bars. The go-between was in custody, and prosecutors believed they knew where the money trail ended. The Adelson family, once admired in Miami's social and professional circles, the Adelsons suddenly found themselves dragged into the spotlight. Not for philanthropy or dentistry, but for a possible murder-for-hire plot. The pressure was mounting, and every phone call, every offhand comment, every nervous glance was now evidence. Charlie Adelson, Wendi's charismatic but sharp-tongued brother, was the first family member to feel the full weight of suspicion. Phone records showed hundreds of calls between Charlie and Catherine McBaniel before and after Dan's murder. Prosecutors argued that McBaniel was more than just his lover. She was his partner in crime. Investigators believed Charlie had provided the money. But was he working alone? Or was he taking orders from someone else? And all eyes turned to the one person whose words had already raised eyebrows, Donna Adelson. Donna Adelson wasn't just a family matriarch. She was a glue that held the Adelsons together, a woman who doted on her children and grandchildren. But behind closed doors, Donna had a sharp tongue. Prosecutors unearthed an old statement she'd once made, that if she could buy her daughter a divorce present, it would be a hitman. At the time, everyone laughed. But now, after Dan's execution, no one was laughing. Was it really a joke? Or was it a glimpse into her true mindset? In 2016, investigators staged a sting operation known as the Bump. An undercover FBI agent approached Donna Adelson in a parking lot, handing her a piece of paper. On it was a demand for money, an extortion attempt, supposedly from someone who knew what the family had done. What Donna didn't know was that the FBI was watching, recording, waiting. Shortly after, wiretaps caught her on the phone with Charlie. Their conversation was chilling. They spoke in veiled terms about paperwork, about taking care of things, and about this being about Wendi's ex-husband. To prosecutors, the meaning was clear. The family knew exactly what this was about. When transcripts of those recordings hit the news, the Adelsons' image shattered. The once respected family was now being painted as cold, calculating, and willing to kill for control. Their dental practice suffered. Their standing in the community collapsed, and whispers spread across Miami like wildfire. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Friends turned away. The Adelsons, once untouchable, were now radioactive. Through it all, Wendi Adelson tried to maintain her innocence. She testified multiple times that she had no knowledge of the murder, but detectives weren't convinced. Her testimony raised eyebrows. She admitted her parents hated Dan, admitted her brother joked about hiring a hitman, and admitted her family offered to buy her a TV as a divorce gift. The words may have been cloaked in humor, but the implications were deadly serious. Was Wendi naive? or complicit. While the Adelsons faced scrutiny, another family was living a nightmare. Dan's parents, Ruth and Phil Markel. They had lost their only son in a violent ambush. And now, they were cut off from their grandsons when he controlled access, and the Adelsons kept the children close. To Ruth and Phil, it felt like losing their son all over again. The very family they suspected of orchestrating Dan's murder was now raising his children. It was a cruelty almost too painful to imagine. By late 2016, Garcia and Rivera were locked in. Rivera had taken a plea deal. Garcia was headed for trial. Magbanua, the supposed go-between, fought the charges, denying any involvement. But prosecutors were patient. They knew the case against the Adelsons was fragile. They needed airtight evidence before making their move. Behind the scenes, the state built a wall of circumstantial proof, financial records, wiretap conversations, testimonies from Rivera and Garcia. And slowly, the wall began to close in on Donna, Charlie, and even Harvey Adelson. As the case grew, so did media attention. True crime shows, newspapers, podcasts. Everyone wanted the story. A respected law professor executed in a suburban driveway. A wealthy South Florida family accused of murder for hire. Hitmen wiretaps, custody battles. It was a story almost too twisted to be real. But for Dan's family, it wasn't entertainment. It was a wound that never healed. By 2017, cracks inside the Adelson family were widening. Charlie felt the heat of suspicion. Donna scrambled to protect her children. Wendi clung to denial. Harvey remained in the background, silent but present. Suspense crescendo. The house of cards was trembling. And soon, one arrest would send the entire Adelson empire toppling. Because while the hitmen were behind bars and Magbanua fought for her freedom, investigators were preparing for the biggest move yet, to finally drag the Adelsons themselves into court. For years, Charlie Adelson managed to stay just out of reach. Prosecutors circled, the public speculated, but the evidence wasn't airtight. He walked free, even as whispers painted him as the mastermind. But in April 2022, after nearly 8 years of suspicion, the door finally closed. Charlie Adelson, the flashy Fort Lauderdale dentist, the man who flaunted his wealth, his girlfriends, and his arrogance, was led away in handcuffs. The FBI had what it needed, a clear recording of Charlie and Catherine Magbanua, captured at a buzzing Miami restaurant in 2016. The conversation, though cloaked in euphemisms, was damning. They talked about the murder, about keeping quiet, about the TV gift that was really code for the hit. For years, investigators held on to that recording. But new audio enhancement technology finally made it crystal clear. And that was enough. On the morning of April 21st, 2022, federal agents moved in. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as Charlie Adelson was placed under arrest outside his condo. The once confident dentist looked pale, his trademark smirk gone. He was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. The Adelson family's nightmare had officially become reality. News of the arrest ripped through the state. Miami media outlets plastered his mugshot across headlines. Tallahassee residents, still haunted by Dan Markel's execution, breathed a sigh of relief. For Dan's family, it was vindication. At last, someone from the Adelson inner circle was facing justice. But this was just the beginning. Wiretaps captured the family's frantic conversations after Charlie's arrest. Donna, the matriarch, was in full panic mode. She discussed fleeing the country. She worried about who was next. Every word was another nail in the coffin. The walls around the Adelsons weren't just closing in, they were collapsing. Charlie pleaded not guilty. His defense team argued that he was a victim of circumstance, that the recordings were misinterpreted, that prosecutors were desperate to tie the murder to someone with money. But prosecutors had a different story, that Charlie orchestrated the murder for a hire plot with cold precision. The trial was set, and the public was ravenous. As journalists dug deeper, a portrait of Charlie emerged that was both flashy and sinister. He drove exotic cars, wore designer clothes, and bragged about connections. He dated strippers, traveled lavishly, and partied like a man untouchable. But beneath the charm was arrogance. Charlie once allegedly joked about the hit, saying buying a TV was cheaper than paying alimony. It was the kind of arrogance that would come back to haunt him in front of a jury. As Charlie's arrest dominated headlines, Wendi Adelson faced renewed scrutiny. Reporters camped outside her home. Cameras followed her every move. Online forums debated whether she knew more than she admitted. She denied any involvement, portraying herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. But the public wasn't buying it. For decades, the Adelson name had meant success in Miami. Their dental practice was renowned, their wealth admired, their influence respected. Now, it was synonymous with betrayal, conspiracy, and murder. The empire was rotting from the inside out. Ruth and Phil Markel, Dan's grieving parents, stood outside a courthouse and delivered a simple, heartbreaking statement. This arrest is a step toward justice, but our fight is not over. We will not rest until everyone responsible for our son's death is held accountable. Their voices cracked with emotion. The crowd stood silent, and the pressure on prosecutors grew heavier. Charlie's arrest set off a chain reaction. If prosecutors could convict him, it would open the door to charges against the rest of the family. Donna, Harvey, maybe even Wendi. The Adelsons knew it, and fear turned into desperation. Every phone call, every move, every public appearance was now under the microscope. The arrest of Charlie Adelson wasn't just another headline. It was a turning point in the Dan Markel murder saga. Suspense builds, voice low, because with Charlie behind bars, investigators finally had the leverage they needed. And soon, it wouldn't just be Charlie in the crosshairs. The matriarch herself, Donna Adelson, was about to face the unthinkable. The day finally came. After nearly a decade of whispers, speculation, and mounting evidence, Charlie Adelson, the wealthy Miami dentist accused of orchestrating a murder-for-hire plot, would face a jury. For Dan Markel's family, it was the moment they had been waiting for. For the Adelsons, it was the nightmare they had always feared. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every bench. True crime podcasters whispered into recorders. Viewers across the country tuned in through live streams. The tension was thick. This wasn't just a trial. It was a showdown between a grieving family's demand for justice and a wealthy clan's desperate attempt to escape downfall. Charlie entered in a suit, clean-shaven, his posture stiff. The smirk he once carried was gone. This wasn't a confident dentist of Miami nightlife. This was a man fighting for his freedom. The prosecution wasted no time. This was not random, the prosecutor told the jury. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was a carefully planned execution, orchestrated by the defendant, Charlie Adelson, because his family could not stand to lose control. The defense countered. They painted Charlie as a victim of circumstance, a man guilty of bad choices and bad company, but not a murder. They pointed fingers at Catherine Magbanua and the hitmen, arguing Charlie was being framed by criminals cutting deals. The jury listened, stone-faced. The state's star weapon, the enhanced restaurant recording from 2016. Jurors heard Charlie's voice, nervously discussing extortion, hinting at payments, and circling back to Wendy's bitter divorce. Who else would be behind this? The prosecutor pressed. Why would a random stranger blackmail him about Dan Markel's murder? The defense objected, arguing interpretation was everything. But the words hung heavy in the air. Charlie Adelson wasn't just implicated, he was cornered. Then came a bombshell. Catherine Magbanua, Charlie's former lover and the alleged middlewoman, testified. On the stand, she detailed her relationship with Charlie, the money exchanged, and the chilling conversations about Dan. The defense tore at her credibility. She was a convicted accomplice. They argued, desperate for leniency, but her words carried weight. When she looked Charlie in the eye and said, "You paid for this," the courtroom went silent. Prosecutors laid out their case step by step. The bitter divorce, the Adelsons' obsession with Wendi moving back to Miami, the payments funneled through Magbanua, the wiretaps after the FBI sting. It was methodical, cold, relentless. The picture was clear. This wasn't coincidence. This was conspiracy. The defense pushed back hard. They argued the prosecution had no direct evidence tying Charlie to the trigger man. No fingerprints. No DNA. No eyewitness placing him at the scene. This case, the defense insisted, is built on the testimony of criminals and imagination of prosecutors. They painted Charlie as a flawed man, but not a killer. Through it all, the jury sat in silence, eyes darting between witnesses and the defendant. Some leaned forward when recordings played. Others scribbled notes when Magbanua testified. But when Dan Markel's family entered the room, clutching photos of their son, the jurors couldn't look away. This wasn't just about law. It was about humanity. The trial wasn't only a battle of facts. It was a war of emotions. Dan's parents wept quietly during testimony about the shooting. Prosecutors replayed the sound of gunfire, reminding the jury of the brutality of the act. And in the gallery, supporters of the Adelsons shifted uncomfortably, unable to reconcile the family. They knew with the accusations at hand. After weeks of testimony, the case came down to closing arguments. The prosecution delivered with fire. This was not about money. This was not about chance. This was about control. And Charlie Adelson believed he was untouchable. But today, the evidence proves otherwise. The defense countered with equal force. You cannot convict a man because you think he knew. You cannot send someone to prison for life on guesses, on hearsay, on assumptions. This case is smoke and mirrors. The courtroom fell into silence as the jury prepared to decide. Days later, the jury returned. The judge asked for silence. The clerk read the verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Charlie Adelson was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation. The once powerful dentist stood frozen, his face drained of all color. Gasps echoed in the courtroom.
In the Circuit Court of the 2nd Judicial Circuit in and for Leon County, Florida, the State of Florida versus Charles Adelson, case number 2016 CF 3036B, verdict. Count 1. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Count 2. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Count 3. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 3 of the indictment, solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. So say we all this 6th day of November, 2023.
Dan's family embraced, tears flowing freely. For them, justice had finally begun. The Adelsons, meanwhile, crumbled. Donna Adelson clutched her face in despair. Wendi fled the courthouse under a barrage of cameras. Closing narration, voice heavy. And though Charlie's conviction was monumental, prosecutors were not finished. Because if Charlie was guilty, the matriarch herself, Donna Adelson, would not be far behind. Charlie Adelson's conviction was a seismic shift. For nearly a decade, the Adelson family had danced on the edge of suspicion, always one step away from direct accountability. But now, with Charlie behind bars, investigators turned their sights on the matriarch herself, Donna Adelson. She was no longer a shadowy figure in the background. She was now the centerpiece of the investigation. For years, Donna Adelson had been described as warm, generous, and fiercely protective of her family. She was a grandmother who spoiled her grandchildren, the mother who fought tooth and nail for her daughter. But prosecutors saw a different picture. To them, Donna was a spark, the one who hated Dan Markel enough to plant the seed of murder in her children's minds. They remembered her infamous words. If I could buy my daughter a divorce present, it would be a hitman. Was it just a joke? Or was it a confession in disguise? After Charlie's conviction, investigators pored over the old FBI wiretaps with renewed intensity. Donna's voice appeared again and again, panicked, cryptic, and desperate. She spoke about things being taken care of, about this being about Wendi's ex-husband, and about her fear being dragged into something. To prosecutors, the meaning was chillingly clear. Donna knew. Back in 2016, the FBI had staged a parking lot sting, the infamous bump. An undercover agent slipped Donna a piece of paper demanding money, pretending to be someone who knew about the murder. Donna didn't run to the police. She didn't shrug it off. Instead, she called Charlie, terrified, and spoke in circles that seemed to acknowledge the crime. Years later, those recordings came back to haunt her. Prosecutors also turned their attention to Donna's relationship with her daughter, Wendi. Emails and testimony suggested Donna pushed Wendi to cut ties with Dan, to fight for custody, to move closer to Miami at all costs. She once wrote to Wendi, "You're letting him control you. We need you back here." Was that maternal concern? Or was it the beginning of a murderous plot? As whispers of Donna's potential indictment spread, the media swarmed. Headlines blared. Will Donna Adelson be next? Podcasts dissected every word of her recorded calls. TV pundits debated whether her grandmother could really order a hit. Donna, once admired in Miami social circles, now avoided public places. She was no longer just a suspect in the shadows. She was the center of a true crime storm. Behind closed doors, the Adelson family fractured. Charlie was in prison, fighting appeals. Wendi faced endless scrutiny. Harvey, the patriarch, kept to the background, silent and weary. And Donna? She spiraled. Friends said she became reclusive. Wiretaps caught her mulling over fleeing the country, terrified she'd be next. The image of a confident matriarch was gone. All that remained was a woman trapped in her own web of fear. Meanwhile, Dan Markel's parents watched closely. They had long suspected Donna's involvement. To them, she wasn't just a meddling mother-in-law. She was the architect of their son's death. Every day without justice was salt in the wound. They still couldn't see their grandsons, still lived in the shadow of the Adelsons' control. For Ruth and Phil, the possibility of Donna's arrest was more than legal justice. It was moral vindication. The case divided the public. Some saw Donna as a cold, manipulative matriarch willing to kill for her daughter's happiness. Others argued she was just a mother who vented in poor taste, caught up in circumstances beyond her control. But prosecutors didn't care about public opinion. They cared about the evidence. And with Charlie convicted, the pressure to indict Donna mounted by the day. By late 2023, whispers inside the courthouse grew louder. Prosecutors were ready. The FBI had their recordings. They had financial trails. They had testimony from Magbanua, Rivera, and Garcia. And now, with Charlie's conviction secured, the state had precedent. It was only a matter of time before Donna Adelson herself would hear the words she feared most. "You're under arrest." Donna reportedly told friends she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't breathe without fearing a knock at the door. Wiretaps caught her hinting at an escape plan, leaving the country, disappearing before the law could catch her. But running only made her look more guilty, and prosecutors knew they had her cornered. Donna Adelson had once ruled her family with warmth and control, but by 2023, her legacy was in ruins. The woman who had once been admired as a devoted grandmother now stood accused in the court of public opinion as the mastermind behind her son-in-law's death. And when her arrest finally came, it would be one of the most shocking falls from grace in modern true crime history. For years, Donna Adelson managed to avoid handcuffs. She was the matriarch, the grandmother, the woman many thought would never face the same fate as her son Charlie. But investigators were patient. They waited. They built their case brick by brick. And then, in November 2023, the waiting ended. In the weeks before her arrest, Donna was restless. Wiretaps caught her hinting at leaving the country. She couldn't shake the fear that her son's conviction would drag her down with him. Friends noticed she withdrew from social life. She rarely appeared in public, spending more time pacing in her condo than enjoying the wealth she once flaunted. It was the calm before the storm. On a chilly November morning, Donna and her husband Harvey arrived at Miami International Airport. They weren't there for a short trip. Prosecutors later revealed Donna was preparing to board a flight, a one-way ticket, possibly her last attempt to flee the looming indictment. But the FBI was already waiting. Agents swarmed, pulling her aside before she could make it to the gate. Harvey watched in shock as Donna, the family matriarch, was placed in handcuffs. Her carefully constructed world collapsed in an instant. Donna Adelson was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, The very same charges that had landed her son Charlie in prison. For years, she had been a shadow suspect, always named but never formally accused. Now, her name was printed in bold across every legal document. When Donna's mugshot was released, it sent shockwaves through Florida. There she was, a 70-something grandmother, once known for her jewelry, her manicured hair, her elegant Miami lifestyle, staring into the camera with hollow eyes. It was more than just a photo. It was a symbol of how far the Adelson empire had fallen. Within days, Donna appeared in court for her first hearing, dressed in a beige jumpsuit, her hands shackled. She looked nothing like the polished woman who once hosted parties and ruled her family with elegance. The prosecutor read the charges aloud. The courtroom buzzed, and for the first time, Donna's future no longer looked untouchable. Prosecutors laid out their evidence. The wiretaps, where Donna discussed a murder in coded language. The parking lot sting, where she accepted the extortion note. Her own statements, suggesting hatred toward Dan and desperation to protect her daughter. This wasn't random, the prosecutor told the judge. Donna Adelson was the architect. She planted the seed, and she helped water it until Dan Markel was dead. Donna's lawyers pushed back. They argued she was simply a mother making careless comments, caught in the whirlwind of her son's downfall. They claimed prosecutors were reaching, desperate to paint her as a villain because of her association with Charlie. She is a grandmother, the defense insisted, not a criminal mastermind. But the evidence was heavy, and the jury pool knew the case well. The arrest shattered what was left of the Adelson family. Charlie was already in prison. Donna was now behind bars. Wendi faced relentless media scrutiny, reporters hounding her at every turn. Harvey, the quiet patriarch, stood alone, his once powerful family name reduced to a synonym for murder. The empire Donna built had become a graveyard of secrets. News outlets across the country erupted. True crime podcasts exploded with new episodes. National headlines read, "From matriarch to murder suspect, Donna Adelson arrested in Dan Markel case." For the public, it was surreal. For Dan's family, it was justice delayed but not denied. Ruth and Phil Markel, who had fought for nearly a decade, addressed the cameras once more. "We have waited years for this moment. Our son was taken from us in cold blood, and while nothing will bring him back, this is another step toward accountability." Their voices cracked with emotion, but their resolve was unshakable. Donna Adelson's arrest was not the end. It was only the beginning. The trial ahead promised to be even more dramatic, even more emotional than Charlie's. The matriarch herself would sit before a jury, accused of orchestrating her son-in-law's death. The family feud that began with a bitter divorce had now destroyed the Adelsons. And soon, the world would watch as Donna Adelson fought for her life in court. The trial of Donna Adelson wasn't just another court case. It was a culmination of a decade-long feud, a saga of betrayal, manipulation, and murder that had torn two families apart. For prosecutors, this was their chance to prove the matriarch had orchestrated everything. For Donna, it was her last chance to hold on to freedom, and the world was watching. By the time jury selection began, the courthouse steps were swarming with cameras. Reporters camped overnight. Podcasters and YouTubers dissected every rumor. For the true crime community, this trial was history in the making. Rarely did a wealthy, upper-class grandmother stand accused of murder for hire. Donna, escorted by guards, kept her eyes low as she entered each day. Gone were the diamonds and tailored outfits. Now, she was reduced to state-issued beige. The prosecution opened with a single cutting line. Dan Markel was murdered not by strangers, but by family. They told the jury this was about control, that Donna Adelson had been unwilling to lose her daughter and grandchildren to a custody arrangement she despised, that instead of compromise, she chose blood. The defense countered, painting Donna as a frail grandmother caught in a web spun by her son Charlie. They insisted she was guilty of nothing more than poor judgment and loose talk. The battle lines were drawn. Day by day, prosecutors unveiled their arsenal. Wiretaps. Donna's voice, calmly discussing moving the grandchildren closer, even if it meant Dan was gone. The parking lot sting. Footage of her handling the extortion note. Evidence of her awareness of conspiracy. Family phone records. Late-night calls exchanged between Donna, Charlie, and Wendi around the time of the murder. Each piece chipped away at her image as an innocent grandmother. Perhaps the most riveting moments came when former friends and associates took the stand. One testified that Donna had openly complained about Dan, describing him as the problem that wouldn't go away. Another recalled her expressing relief after his death. Then came Catherine Magbanua, already convicted, already serving her sentence. She looked directly at Donna as she told the jury that the Adelsons had bankrolled the murder plot. It was a dagger through the defense's strategy. Donna's lawyers tried to humanize her. They highlighted her age, her role as a mother and grandmother, her charity work in Miami. They insisted she was merely a bystander, unfairly dragged into a case that belonged to Charlie. But the jury's faces told another story. They leaned forward during the wiretap recordings. They scribbled notes during Magbanua's testimony. The evidence was sticking. Wendi Adelson was subpoenaed. She sat stiffly in the witness box, answering with clipped words. She distanced herself from her mother, claiming ignorance of any plots. But under cross-examination, cracks showed. Jurors watched closely. The once glamorous Adelson family now looked fractured, each member protecting themselves at the expense of the others. Throughout the trial, Donna's demeanor shifted. Some days she looked defiant, whispering furiously to her attorneys. Other days, she seemed broken, clutching tissues as testimony replayed the darkest years of her life. But one thing never changed. She avoided the eyes of Dan Markel's parents, who sat faithfully in the gallery day after day, determined to see justice through. The prosecution's final words rang like a hammer. Donna Adelson wanted control, and when the law didn't give her what she wanted, she chose murder. She sat at the top of this conspiracy. She is just as guilty as the gunman who pulled the trigger. The defense clung to doubt. Donna Adelson is not a killer. She is a grandmother. This case is built on assumptions, not proof. The jury was left to decide, grandmother or mastermind. As the jury deliberated, tension blanketed the courthouse. Reporters waited outside, fingers hovering over keyboards. Social media buzzed with theories. Inside, Donna sat still, staring at the table, her lips pressed tight. For perhaps the first time in her life, she had no control. The stage was set for a verdict that would either shatter or salvage the last remnants of her freedom.
If you please can identify yourself for the record.
Yes, my name is Ruth Mark.
That way, 'cause you're
Sorry?
I'm worried you're gonna trip. Just,
Okay,
that's fine.
I already did. My name is Ruth Markel.
You may give your impact statement, ma'am.
Thank you, Judge Everett. To the Honorable Judge Everett, my name is Ruth Markel. I am the mother of the late Dan Markel. I stand before you today to express the profound sadness and grief that Dan's family and I have endured since his tragic murder. We have lost a treasure. My son's Dan's life was cut tragically short at 41 years old. For 11 years, we have been forced to a life filled with unimaginable pain and heartbreak. Dan's father, Phil, and his sister, Shelley, share in this unending sorrow. Dan was a devoted father, brother, and son. Dan's life was marked by his devotion to family, education, and community. He was a loving, caring, and inspiring person. His academic journey included studying politics and philosophy at Harvard University, earning a master's degree later in political theory from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Emmanuel College in Cambridge, and later going back to Harvard to get a law degree. Dan was a prolific scholar and did start, co-founded the influential Prof's blog. His energy, drive, and sociability greatly enriched the FSU College of Law. Dan's life was filled with passion, music, dance, sports, travel, and people. But of all my son's accomplishments, however, I am most proud of the devoted father Danny was to his two sons, Benjamin and Lincoln. Dan was present, loving, and supportive, always putting his children's well-being first. He regularly attended the boys' daycares, reading with them. His office was filled with their drawings, and his home, his living room, filled with their toys. Dan was the boys' hero, and they have been forced to grow up without a father. Dan's murder has shattered our family and caused deep permanent pain. This was a particularly senseless crime, and the murder was particularly insensible. It was not revenge. Dan was a law-abiding and respectful citizen, an active father, and a living son. His life was devoted to teaching and helping others. The pain and suffering of Dan's murder goes well beyond other families too. That is why I wrote the book, The Unveiling, a mother's reflection on murder, grief, and trial life. In my unrelenting grief, I turned to advocacy, to feel purpose, and to help others with these tragic losses. I have found meaning and comfort to connect with others who want to serve justice. To all the community of journalists, TV programs, podcasters, Tallahassee communities, and the allies who have put their hearts in keeping Danny's story alive, we are full of thanks. To law enforcement and prosecutors, our gratitude is beyond for their dedicated, careful perseverance in seeking justice for Danny and our family. If Tallahassee is known for football, Tallahassee should be known for the prosecution and for law enforcement. They have done an outstanding job. These extraordinary efforts underscore the brutal truth of our family's story. Danny's murder was orchestrated by his former mother-in-law, Donna Adelson, and other co-conspirators, and is a crime of cruelty. It is a murder of grief, a murder of selfishly prioritizing one's own desires over what is just or right. And at its core, this was a murder of convenience, so that one grandmother could live closer to her grandchildren. She killed their father and ripped the children from the other grandparents' lives. Donna Adelson's crimes against Dan began long before his murder. She belittled Dan in front of his children. She spread lies about it and contributed to a brutal separation between Dan and Wendi. She rented the house, and Dan came home and he found that Wendi and the boys were gone with most of their belongings. He called this devastation Pearl Harbor. Donna's eagerness for Wendi to divorce Dan and to relocate to South Florida led her to increasingly devise desperate schemes. Despite these efforts, the court ruled that Wendi could not move the boys away from their loving father. Failing to achieve her goal through legal means, Donna finally resorted to orchestrating Dan's murder. She plotted, planned, and paid for his murder. Donna's crimes led to further devastation. Her middle son, Charlie, was convicted and sentenced to a life in prison for his role in facilitating Danny's murder for hire. Can you imagine a mother involving a son to complete a murder? Donna's eldest son, Rob, an honest and decent man, is estranged from the family, and her younger child, Wendi, has decided once again to relocate to another state. Her actions and those of her co-conspirators have caused children to lose their parents. Catherine McManus, Freda Garcia, and Charlie Adelson, also convicted, are all convicted for life and have lost access to their children. Prior to her arrest, Donna's recorded phone calls with Charlie reveal their lack of a moral compass or capacity for self-reflection. She blames external forces for her family's curse. They're outside of her, but she is the curse, and lashes out angrily at witnesses who took the brave step to testify. Her modus operandi has always been to run from Tallahassee and then to try to flee to Vietnam. For our family, there is no such prospect for escape. Danny's absence, and that leaves a hole at the center of our lives, no matter where we go. Yet Dan's murder was not enough for Donna. His death was not enough. Danny had to be fully erased from his beloved sons. The boy's last name was ever changed, an extraordinary decision to excise the Markel name from Phil's only grandsons who shared his last name. And after the first arrests were made, Donna didn't allow the Markel family to have access for over 6 years. It was only when there was a phenomenal Tallahassee advocacy group that passed the Markel Act. The passage of this bill was immediately followed by our first invitation to see the boys after the arrest. The door only cracked open. Despite these efforts, we remain excluded from the boys' lives. We were not at their bar mitzvahs or graduations. We have extremely highly choreographed visits and communications. We only wait for the day that Benjamin and Lincoln will visit their father and his grave in his father's history and his grave in Toronto. We want nothing more. The facts of Danny's murder, are difficult to swallow. The experiences Phil, Shelley, and I have been forced to suffer are profound as homicide survivors and victims of the criminal system. The lives of Danny's 2 sons, our grandchildren, were forever turned upside down by this crime. Benjamin and Lincoln were only preschoolers when their father was murdered, and now they are forced to confront and try to understand the unthinkable crimes of murder and the Adelsons' involvement. Our lives will never return to normal. For those who loved Danny and for those who Danny loved, There is no escape from the wicked effects of what Donna Adelson set in motion, carried out, and paid for, and for many years enjoyed the aftermath of. Donna Adelson has caused immense devastation and an untimely, undeserved murder through her actions. While no trial or verdict can ever heal the profound wounds caused by Dan's murder, justice must be served. I respectfully ask the court to impose the maximum sentence on Donna Adelson. Her lack of cooperation and remorse throughout the case demands justice, the justice that Dan's life and memory fully deserve. We are immensely grateful to the court for its careful and compassionate deliberation. Respectively, Ruth Markel.
Thank you, Ms. Markel. Are there any other victim impact statements this evening?
One more, Judge.
If you please could tell us your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Phil Markel. I'm Danny's father. Judge Everett, I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the impact of Donna Adelson's actions on my families and the families of so many others. While this victim impact statement is addressed to you, Your Honor, it is also intended for the Adelson family, Harvey, Charlie, Wendi, and particularly Donna. I would like them to understand and reflect on the deep and irreparable damage they have caused. The pain that they have caused my family is obvious and permanent, but they have also caused lifelong harm to their own immediate family and so many other families and children around. Donna's selfishness, cruelty, and complete disrespect for human life, along with that of her co-conspirators, have left families forever broken. Louis Rivera, his children have no father. Catherine Magbanawa and Sigfredo Garcia, their children have no parents. Charlie Adelson, his son, Roman, has no father. Rob Adelson and his wife and their 2 children have lost their uncle and grandparents. Shelley and Ian, my daughter, their 3 children, my grandchildren, are left without an uncle and are separated from their cousins. Of course, their heinous and callous actions have left me, Ruth, and Shelley without our Danny, and Ben and Lincoln without their father. For anyone to commit such a cold-blooded, unprovoked act of murder is horrific. For Donna, someone who claims to care so much about Ben and Lincoln, her sun shines. Her actions are beyond comprehension. She has harmed forever the people she claims to have loved. In the Jewish custom, we have an expression to always wish others to live to 120 years of age. For Donna, I wish her to live to 120, alone in her jail cell. I wish that every day of her remaining days, she thinks about the harm she has caused to so many, especially those 2 boys she claims to have loved so much. For these reasons, Your Honor, I ask the court sentence Donna Adelson to the maximum possible sentence. And my only short question to Donna, was it worth it? Respectfully, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Markel. Are there any other matters that the court needs to address this evening, Ms. Koppelman?
No, Your Honor.
With the PSI being ordered, the court will pronounce the sentence as to counts 2 and 3 after it's been completed. The parties have had an opportunity to review the pre-sentence investigation report and make any objections if they believe they need to. As to the 3 counts that the jury has found the defendant guilty of, I will adjudicate her guilty at this time, but sentence will be pronounced as to the 3 counts at a later date. She is remanded for sentencing at this time. Lieutenant Henry, please notify the commander at the jail that the appropriate screening needs to take place to ensure that the defendant is in an area where she is not subject to any self-harm. For a case management date coming up, what would the parties request?
Ms. Dugan's October court day, Your Honor.
I believe that is 10/14. Is that correct, Ms. Dugan?
Yes, sir.
October 14th for case management at 2:30 p.m. That will be in the normal courtroom, 3B. Patricia, if you can make sure that the notice goes to DOC so they are aware that the PSI needs to be completed as soon as possible.
I'm sorry to send it, Judge.
Thank you. We are in recess at this time. We will reconvene on October 14th. Have a good evening, everyone.
The jury had heard weeks of testimony. They had seen the wiretaps, the phone logs, the faces of grieving parents. Now, everything came down to 12 strangers seated in a closed room, deciding the fate of Donna Adelson. For nearly a decade, Dan Markel's family had waited for this moment. For Donna, it was the longest wait of her life. Inside the deliberation room, the jury sifted through binders of evidence. They replayed tapes. They debated Donna's role. Some jurors initially hesitated. Was it possible she was simply a mother covering for her son? But the conversations revealed a troubling pattern. Donna wasn't just a bystander. She had been involved from the start. Every replay of her voice on those wiretaps deepened the silence in the room. As the hours ticked by, the courthouse buzzed with speculation. Reporters huddled together, whispering updates. Cameras were fixed on the courtroom doors. The Markels sat quietly in the gallery, hands clasped, faces drawn with exhaustion. And Donna, she remained in a holding cell, pacing like a caged animal, awaiting the sound of the verdict bell. Late afternoon, a note was delivered to the judge. We have reached a verdict. The courtroom filled within minutes. Reporters scrambled for seats. The air was electric, charged with suspense. Donna was led in, shackled at the wrists and ankles. She sat down, hands trembling slightly, though her face fought to remain composed. Behind her, Harvey Adelson leaned forward in the gallery, his expression unreadable. The judge reminded the room of the gravity of what was about to happen. There will be no outbursts, he said sternly. Respect must be shown in this court. The jury filed in, eyes heavy, some clutching notes. They had carried the weight of 2 families' futures on their shoulders. The clerk asked the question, on the charge of first-degree murder, how do you find the defendant? The jury foreperson stood, voice steady, but each word cut like glass. Guilty. Gasps filled the courtroom. Donna's shoulders jerked, her mask of composure cracking. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder? Guilty. On the charge of solicitation of murder? Guilty. The verdict was unanimous. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Donna's eyes widened, then narrowed. She shook her head slightly, whispering to her attorneys. Her lips formed the word, no. Her son was already behind bars. Now, she too had been condemned. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. On the other side of the room, Ruth and Phil Markel clutched each other's hands. Tears streamed down Ruth's face. Phil stared straight ahead, jaw tight, refusing to let his emotions spill. They had waited 9 long years for justice. And now, piece by piece, it was finally here. As the judge dismissed the jury, murmurs swept the room. Some whispered. Finally, others shook their heads in disbelief. Donna's lawyers immediately filed motions for appeal. But the verdict stood. She was convicted on all counts. The matriarch of the Adelson family was now a convicted murderer. Guards rose and placed shackles on Donna's wrists once again. As she was led away, she turned slightly, perhaps toward her husband, perhaps toward her daughter, perhaps toward no one at all. Her eyes were wet, her face pale. The cameras captured every second. Those images would dominate headlines. The once proud grandmother being marched out of court in chains. The verdict was in. Donna Adelson was guilty, but the story wasn't over. The next chapter would decide how she would spend the rest of her life. Free or behind bars until the end of her days. The verdict was in. Donna Adelson was guilty on all counts. But one question remained. How much of her life would she spend behind bars? For the prosecution, the answer was simple: forever. For Donna, it was her last chance at mercy. The sentencing hearing would decide her fate. In the weeks leading to sentencing, Donna's attorneys filed motions. They pleaded for leniency, citing her age, her health, and her role as a grandmother. But prosecutors countered swiftly. This was no ordinary defendant. Donna had orchestrated a murder for hire. She had shattered a family and poisoned her own bloodline with violence. The stage was set. On sentencing day, the courthouse was overflowing. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Family, friends, reporters, curious onlookers. Donna shuffled into the courtroom, shackles clinking softly. Her hair, once styled to perfection, was now gray and unkempt. Her eyes darted nervously around the room. It was a far cry from the matriarch who once commanded her family with authority. The prosecutor rose. This crime was cold-blooded, he said firmly. It was calculated. It was motivated by greed, control, and hatred. Donna Adelson has shown no remorse. She deserves to spend the rest of her life in prison. He spoke of Dan Markel's children, how they had been robbed of a father, how their memories of him were frozen in time. He turned toward the Markels, acknowledging their pain, their endurance. His voice was unshakable. This is not a case for leniency. This is a case for accountability. Then it was the defense's turn. Donna's lead attorney adjusted his glasses, voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, Donna Adelson is a 70-something-year-old grandmother. She is not a danger to society. She has lived a life of contributions, a family. We ask the court to consider her age, her declining health, and the possibility of rehabilitation. But the words fell heavy in the room. Few were moved. The judge turned to Donna. Mrs. Adelson, do you wish to address the court before sentencing? She rose slowly, gripping the podium with both hands. Her voice cracked as she began. I never wanted this, she said softly. I never wanted Dan harmed. I am a mother, a grandmother. My words were twisted. My intentions misunderstood. I am not the monster they say I am. She paused, staring at the judge, then at the jury box now empty. I beg for mercy, for my family, for my grandchildren. It was the closest thing to remorse the world had ever heard from her. But for many in the gallery, it was too little, too late. Then came the most emotional moment of all. Ruth Markel, Dan's mother, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she unfolded her statement. Her voice wavered, but her words cut deep. You didn't just kill my son. You destroyed generations. You took him from his children, from us. Every holiday, every birthday, every moment, stolen. Phil Markel followed, his voice firm but heavy with grief. We will never forgive, but we will never stop fighting for Dan's memory. Justice may be delayed, but today it is not denied. The courtroom was silent, except for the quiet sobbing of those in the gallery. Finally, the judge spoke. He acknowledged Donna's age and her plea for mercy, but he also weighed the evidence, the pain inflicted and the cold planning behind the crime. This was not a mistake of passion, he said gravely. This was deliberate. This was orchestrated. And this court cannot ignore that truth. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on Donna. The sentence is life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Donna gasped audibly. Her legs buckled, and for a moment, it seemed she might fall. Guards steadied her. Her family in the gallery, Harvey and Wendi, sat frozen, their faces pale, their eyes wide. The Adelson name, once anonymous with wealth and success, was now bound forever to murder and shame. The Markels embraced quietly, tears streaming, relief washing over them like a tide. As the hearing ended, Donna was led away for the last time. Shackles on her ankles, her hands cuffed, she shuffled toward the side door. She turned once, glancing at the gallery. Her eyes were glassy, her lips quivered, but no words came. The door closed behind her, echoing like a final gavel strike. The matriarch of the Adelson family would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The feud that began with a divorce had ended with a life sentence. But in the shadows of justice, the wounds remained for the Markels, for the Adelsons, and for two children who would grow up knowing that their family was divided by murder.
If the jury foreperson could please rise. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?
Yeah.
If you please can hand the verdict form to the bailiff. Having reviewed the verdict form, it is in its proper order. At this time, I will publish the verdict. We, the jury, find as follows as to count one of the indictment, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Mrs. Adelson, control yourself. Count two. We, the jury, find as follows as to count two of the indictment. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Count three. We, the jury, find as follows as to count three of the indictment. Solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. And it is signed and dated by the foreperson. One moment. Members of the jury, the bailiff will escort you to the jury room. Adelson, while this was not the outcome I'm sure that you desired, there will not be any further outbursts in front of the jury. If you cannot control yourself, I am going to have to determine if you will be removed from the remainder of this process. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Do you need a moment to collect yourself? Before the jurors are brought back in, we will take a brief 2-minute break. Please give her tissues if she needs them. When the jurors are brought back into the room, does the defense wish to have the jurors polled before they are discharged?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. Please bring back in the jurors so we can conclude with their portion of the trial. Members of the jury, before I discharge you for this evening, I am briefly going to poll you concerning whether your verdict is unanimous at the request of one of the parties. When you hear your last name, please appropriately respond. Before you are discharged, please listen carefully. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you for your time and consideration of this case. I also wish to advise you of some very special privileges that are enjoyed by jurors. No juror can ever be required to talk about the discussions that occurred in the jury room except by court order. For many centuries, our society has relied upon juries for consideration of difficult cases. We have recognized for hundreds of years that a jury's deliberations, discussions, and votes should remain their private affair as long as they wish it. Therefore, the law gives you a unique privilege not to speak about the jury's work. Although you are at liberty to speak with anyone about your deliberations, you are also at liberty to refuse to speak to anyone. A request to discuss either your verdict or your deliberations may come from those who are simply curious, from those who might seek to find fault with you, from the media, from attorneys, or elsewhere. It will be up to you to decide whether to preserve your privacy as a juror. With that being said, I want to extend my thanks on behalf of the entire Second Circuit for your service in this matter. You are discharged. Have a good evening. As to the jury's verdict, with the jury having found the defendant guilty of the 3 charges of the indictment, is the defense asking for a pre-sentence report on counts 2 and 3. As to count 1, the penalty is statutory, and essentially there is no modification for it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, pre-sentence investigation and report is ordered by the court as to counts 2 and 3. As to count 1, is there any reason why we cannot proceed to sentencing on this matter?
Your Honor, we would request an opportunity to ensure that our client is okay before we proceed to sentencing. It's my understanding that Charlie Adelson wasn't sentenced right away, and we're asking for the same purpose.
Very well. Court then will set a separate sentencing date. Go ahead.
The sentencing of Donna Adelson reverberated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. It wasn't just another trial concluded. It was the downfall of an entire dynasty. And as the news spread, reactions poured in from every corner. From the families, the community, and the world that had been watching every twist of the saga. The moment Donna was led away, a wave of emotions rippled through the gallery. The Markel family embraced, quiet tears slipping down their faces. Prosecutors exchanged solemn nods, aware they had just closed one of the most complex cases in Florida's history. Reporters sprinted for the doors, eager to break headlines before anyone else. And the Adelson side of the gallery sat in stunned silence, the weight of reality finally pressing down. Outside, a storm of cameras and microphones awaited. Breaking news alerts flashed across phones. Donna Adelson sentenced to life in prison. Later that afternoon, Ruth and Phil Markel faced the cameras. Ruth's voice cracked with emotion. This has been a long journey. Nothing brings back our son. But today, justice has taken another step forward. Phil added, his tone steady. We will continue to fight for our grandchildren. They deserve to know their father's legacy, not the lies that have surrounded them. Their words resonated far beyond Tallahassee. In contrast, the Adelson family offered no public statement. Harvey Adelson avoided the cameras, leaving quietly through a side door. Wendi, already under years of suspicion, retreated entirely from public view. Neighbors in Miami whispered about the once powerful family that had become infamous overnight. Their name, once tied to wealth and success, was now etched into the history books for betrayal and blood. Legal analysts weighed in across networks. This case is unprecedented. One attorney noted, "It shows that no matter your wealth or influence, you can't outrun the law forever." Others pointed out the rarity of an elderly woman facing a life sentence for murder for hire. It wasn't just justice, it was a cautionary tale. Beyond the headlines, the human cost lingered. Dan's children were now teenagers, caught in the crossfire of divided families. They had lost a father to murder, and a grandmother, uncle, and possibly even their mother to the justice system. For them, the word family would never mean the same. Meanwhile, Harvey Adelson, once the quiet patriarch, now lived in isolation, burdened with shame and suspicion, his empire of respectability in ruins. The case sparked national conversations about family courts, custody battles, and how resentment can spiral into violence. Talk shows debated whether the legal system should have intervened sooner. Op-eds described it as a cautionary tale for families torn apart by divorce and pride. It wasn't just a Florida story anymore. It had become a mirror, reflecting the darkest corners of family conflict across America. By the end of that week, one truth was clear. The story of Dan Markel's murder had become more than just a trial. It was a saga, one that revealed how obsession with control could destroy generations. And as Donna Adelson settled into her prison cell, the world moved on, but the Markels never would. Their pain was permanent. Their loss was eternal. The aftermath left scars that would never heal. The Adelsons had fallen. The Markels had fought. And in the shadow of justice, two children carried the burden of a family feud that turned into murder. The trials were over. The verdicts delivered. The sentences handed down. But the story of Dan Markel's murder was far from complete. For every question answered in court, others remained in the shadows. And the legacy of this tragedy would ripple far beyond the prison walls, holding the Adelson family. Dan Markel's name was no longer just tied to his scholarship, his teaching, or his contributions to law. He was remembered as a victim, a man gunned down in his driveway because of a family feud. Yet his family vowed to keep his true legacy alive. Books, lectures, and foundations were launched in his memory. His parents dedicated their lives to making sure his children would one day know who their father really was. The deepest scars belonged to the two boys Dan left behind. They had lost not only their father, but now their grandmother, their uncle, and possibly their mother to the justice system. How do you explain to children that their family tree was cut down by greed and hatred? That the very people meant to protect them had been the architects of their father's death? Their future was uncertain. But their father's family promised to shield them with truth, even as lies swirled around them. Even after the convictions, the case left lingering doubts. How deeply was Wendi involved? Was she truly ignorant of the plot, or had she simply been insulated by her family's actions? What role did Harvey play? Was he a passive bystander or a silent supporter? Could others still face charges in the years ahead? The prosecutors hinted the investigation was not entirely closed. The possibility of more arrests still hung in the air. In Tallahassee, where Dan once lived, the case remained a wound etched into the city's memory. Neighbors still recalled the day police swarmed the quiet neighborhood. Students of Dan Markel spoke of his brilliance, his humor, his mentorship. For them, justice had come, but healing was slower. Once, The Adelson name stood for status in Miami, dentistry, philanthropy, social power. Now it was forever stained. Charlie Adelson convicted. Donna Adelson sentenced to life. The family fortune swallowed by legal fees. The family reputation ruined. The empire had crumbled, and it all traced back to a single fatal decision: to turn a custody battle into a murder plot. The story became more than just a true crime case. It was a mirror for society. It showed how bitterness can metastasize into violence, how wealth can delay justice, but not deny it forever. And it served as a reminder that family disputes, left unchecked, can destroy not just relationships, but lives. For Ruth and Phil Markel, justice had been served. But justice did not mean healing. They still woke up every day to the absence of their son. They still fought every year for access to their grandchildren. Justice had given them a verdict, but it had not given them peace. Even now, one question lingers above all. If Donna Adelson had chosen differently, if her family had chosen differently, would Dan Markel still be alive? The question haunts everyone connected to the case. It is the mystery that cannot be solved by any court. In the end, the story of Dan Markel is a story of love and loss, of betrayal and justice. It is a reminder that even the most privileged families can harbor the darkest secrets. The Adelsons tried to erase a man from his children's lives. Instead, they erased their own legacy. Dan's name endures. His memory lives on, and his story remains a cautionary tale for generations to come.